Thank you for coming to our monthly adaptation community meeting. My name is Lily Jinka, and I work with John Furlow from UNC to organize these every month. John usually gives a short intro at the beginning of every meeting, but he is on travel for work, so he asked me to just welcome you all and thank you for being here. Thank you for being here as well. Jean is a senior environmental scientist in the Global Climate Change and Environmental Sciences Division at RTI International. And he has more than 30 years experience in environmental and public health program design, implementation, and management. And today his presentation will be on an integrated suite of watershed modeling tools called Hydroid, being sponsored currently by the Inter-American Development Bank. So Jean will present for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have about until 5:30 for a Q&A. Also, we have people joining us via webcast and calling in. So I'd like to welcome those people as well, and also let them know if they do have questions for Jean to type them into the chat box, and we'll be able to read them out to Jean a little bit later towards the end. And also, we should just start with going around the room and having everybody introduce themselves. Just give your name and your organization, and then
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Bramer, Agility Corporation in the ENR division.
Good afternoon. My name is Rodolfo Camacho from APTA Associates, and I lead the climate change practice at APTA Associates.
Hi, everyone. I'm Suzanne Osment from the World Resources Institute.
I'm Randy Snodgrass, also from WRI.
Hi, I'm James Arnott from the Aspen Global Change Institute.
I'm Jennifer Norfolk with Counterpart International.
Phil Descends from the White House Council on Environmental Quality.
Marnie Salmon, Wildlife Conservation Society.
Yaorti, Wildlife
Hi, I'm Peyton Deeks with EcoDeep.
Hi, Ann Kuntz with Relief International Enterprise Works Division.
Good afternoon, I'm Doug Poole with Agility.
Hello, I'm Mike Savonis with ICF International.
I'm Deborah Tepley with Agility.
Mike Cody, Agility Corporation.
And Mukul, also Agility.
Well, great. Thank you very much for coming. I don't know if my voice is being broadcast, but hopefully it'll be loud enough without me having to use a mic. I tend to wander when I talk, so I'm glad you've got this on two screens. You ought to be able to see around me, whichever position I take up. I'm also glad to be interrupted as I go along. I think my comments will take about 30, maybe 45 minutes, but I welcome questions as I'm going along if something's not clear, as well as whatever questions you may have at the end of this. What I'm going to describe for you is work that a team of us at RTI is performing for the Inter-American Development Bank. We have been working for about a year and a half, 2 years, to develop a integrated modeling system for working on surface water flows and looking at the impact of climate change on those flows as well as how the flows may impact infrastructure. This is called Hydrobid. It is going to be released relatively soon. I think relatively soon. It's actually being done through another mechanism on a website that is tied to the IDB website. So what I'm showing you is work that has actually been completed for 6 to 9 months already. And right at the end, I'll talk about what we see coming over the next 2 years in phase 2 of the project. Where do I point this to make it work? Oh, no, this is the advanced. Ah, there it is. Did I just turn it off? Which one is too advanced? Oh, okay. All right, thanks. As I said, Hydrobid is a system for an integrated quantitative analysis. It's a modeling platform that models hydrology and also pulls in data on climate change in order to look at the impact of climate change on surface water flows. And this particular system has been designed for Latin America and Caribbean region. And IDB wants the system so that their clients, really their member countries and the hydrologic institutes and government entities responsible for infrastructure can assess the potential impacts of climate change on water flows and how the changes in those water flows will then affect either the design or the performance of infrastructure in order to support the design of effective and adaptive projects. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this chart because it'll give you an orientation to how the system is organized. And then I'll go through each of the components and provide a bit more detail. The main backbone of the system is called the Analytical Hydrography Dataset. Now, for anyone who has done hydrologic analysis in the United States, you may be familiar with something called the National Hydrography Dataset, which is developed and maintained by U.S. Geological Survey and EPA. We at RTI have created an electronic analog of that type of system for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'll describe it in more detail in the next steps. But basically, this delineates the catchments and also the stream networks for the entire Latin American region, capturing 329,000 catchments, all of which are less than 100 square kilometers in size. So it is a medium resolution system. We then take various data inputs on soil type, land use, rainfall, and temperature, and feed those into the AHD, the Analytical Hydrography Dataset, and then run a rainfall runoff model. GWLF is a standard model used in the discipline. That then produces a time series of projected water flows at a particular location and time that is defined by the system's user. So you can look at large scale, you can look at fine scale, you can look now, you can look 20, 30, 40 years into the future at a location of your choice and obtain a projected set of water flows, a series. Then, the parts in blue are really what is Hydrobid. It's a packaged system that is executable using downloadable files. Then there's additional work that's necessary based on the specific application for which you're using Hydrobid. You'll need other data inputs such as water demand or the value of water or the performance specifications for a particular dam or water system. And then apply other models, economic models, engineering models, et cetera, or WEAP or MIC, in order to come up with risk analysis and specifications for adapted infrastructure. That's the overall design. What we have packaged for use as a system is the blue part, but when we apply it, we of course add the other pieces as well. The Analytical Hydrography Dataset is based on topographic data that is obtained from the shuttle. And this is processed in a way that allows you to locate both polygons as well as line segments. The polygons are the catchments, and these catchments are all less than 100 square kilometers. And then the stream segments are generally of an average length of about 11 kilometers. And the stream segments are connected. So we have a direction of flow indicator at each of the junction points. And so we can track flow throughout the entire basin from the upper reaches to the outflow point. And this has been prepared. It's possible to increase or decrease the scale of the area that you want to model. And so, looking at you can look at an entire basin as huge as the Amazon. You can look at sub-basins within that area, and you can navigate both upstream, as in this case, or downstream. You can pick a location, and you can determine all of the locations downstream to which water will flow from that catchment. And so you can track flow downstream as well as measuring the total flow for an area as you choose to define it. In Central America, the system now contains 33,000 catchments. For the Caribbean nations, it's, of course, a much smaller number. And for all of the South American continent, 193,000 catchments. And so it's a very comprehensive system. And this is already programmed and ready for use by institutions within the member states of the IDB. This is a system that is owned by IDB, and they are going to determine the rules and conditions under which it is used. My understanding at this point is that they plan to make it available through their website under a memorandum of understanding with users that will require that those user organizations participate in a community of practice, that they receive training in the use of the system, that they share results of their use of the system so that can become part of the combined experience and can provide feedback on improvements over time. We'll see how that gets rolled out over the next 6 months to a year, but that's my understanding of it. What they have are the executable files and all of the data sets that we've created for them, which they can now make available just from electronic copy, but ultimately will be downloadable from there. All right, so I've described the backbone of the system, which is the river network. This is a schematic diagram of the generalized watershed loading function, which is the rainfall runoff model. For those of you who are maybe hydrologists, you can please ignore the simplifications that I'll make here. I'm not going to go through the right-hand side of the figure. I'm not going to describe the equations. But basically, what the model does is it takes partitions. There's a certain amount of precipitation which is measured or modeled, and that is then divided into the amount that infiltrates and the amount that runs off to streams or to other surface water bodies. The water that infiltrates into the surface may then evaporate, or it may infiltrate further into a shallow saturated zone, which then passes through groundwater flow to surface water features, or it passes all the way into deep saturated zones and is stored but basically lost to surface water flow. The amount of water that winds up in the river or the stream depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the amount of precipitation. It depends on the types of soil. It depends on the land use, whether this is an urban area, a rural area, whether it's farmed or forested. It also depends on the temperature, because that affects evapotranspiration. So all of these factors, soil type, land use, temperature, and amount of rainfall are really the determinants for how much water flows into a stream. And therefore, those are the types of data that we need to collect in order to run this model. The information is obtained from a number of different sources, and it can be obtained from international organizations, NOAA, NASA, et cetera, or if there are local data sources that are reliable and have information in a form that can be captured and used, then we can use that as well. But we need to populate the model and the AHD with data of these types. And then the flows are calculated for each stream segment and are traced down to the outflow point. So the model runs iteratively. It determines the rainfall in this area, other factors, takes other factors into account, determines what the outflow is at the outflow point, and then sums outflow from all of the stream segments that are coming to that point, and then continues downstream in order to generate flows at the outflow point. And as a user, you can specify whether you want to know outflow series at this point, or that point. The intended uses for the system are varied. What unites them is that they all depend on an understanding and ability to project water flow. And so whether you're doing a general water resources assessment and trying to allocate available water to various uses, or whether you're trying to work on more specific project applications, planning an irrigation project, looking at forecasting the capacity of hydroelectric installation, or looking at the sufficiency of water for urban water supply. Those are uses of flow data. And also looking at trying to estimate the needs for maintaining ecosystems, or whether or not there are going to be eco deficits in water supply to particular ecosystems. That's another application. And no problem. In phase 2 of this effort, IDB is trying to line up specific projects that are currently being developed within the bank that touch on as many of these applications as possible. So I'm going to stop there and just take a breath and see if you have any questions so far, because I'm about to launch into the case study. The original modeling is daily, but we summarize that on a monthly or yearly basis.
In Latin America, there is quite a bit of challenges in terms of stations on the quality of the precipitation, and you end up even feeling for gaps and
right.
with all the statistical analysis. So it's a big challenge, and I don't know what type of network you use for precipitation, or how that's is input by the user, or how that works.
I'm going to illustrate the answer to that question in just a minute. The benefit of being able to expand or focus the area of interest for this model is that we can capture an area for which there is more reliable original monitoring data. So you'll see in a minute that when, in this case study, we experienced exactly that. We were trying to model a particular basin for which there was inadequate data available. We were able to expand the scope and look at other sites where there was more adequate monitoring data. Now, if that's not available anywhere within the basin that you're looking at, then we would have to go to international data sets from rainfall estimates from satellite, cloud cover, et cetera. But the system is set up to accept either local data or internationally available modeled data sets. Other questions?
How do you incorporate glacial?
We don't do that explicitly yet. We haven't worked in areas where glacial melt is a dominant factor. It's something that we probably should do. But right now, we're just really looking at precipitation as the original source for stream flow.
So with additional information, do you think it's possible to use this in a flooding analysis where the stream beds would be overflowed?
You can certainly use it as a source of input data to a flood analysis, looking at water flows into an area. The scale of this system is really not sufficient for the typical flood risk analysis. I mean, which is looking at a much smaller scale of topography. But in terms of being able to generate some time series of flows into a stream network, yes, this would be very useful.
This may in fact be this may in fact merit the same answer as the previous question. But I was wondering about snowmelt dominated watersheds and how would this work in that type of context?
I think that we really haven't been tasked with dealing with that issue yet, but I think what we would do is turn to folks who know how to model snowmelt as the dominant input inflow to a particular system, and then we would take that as the original flow at headwaters, and try to look at how you would add flow to it downstream.
The hydrography data set that you compiled includes dominated watersheds, but the model is kind of steered towards rain-fed?
Correct.
Okay.
That's correct. No, the topography, the stream flows and the catchments are comprehensive there across the entire Latin American region. So obviously it does include areas that are dominated. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, great. So the case study application for this work was done in the basin in Argentina, up in northwest Argentina. The particular issue in this location is there's a town called San Salvador de Jujuy, which experiences water shortages seasonally, but reliably every year. And the one dam, which is really more of a dike because it's completely filled with sediment, provides water flow diversion point for water to San Salvador, but also to a system that supplies irrigation water further downstream. And so the challenge or the question really that was posed to us is, are there adaptive actions that can be taken now that would alleviate some of the seasonal water shortages? And IDB is actually getting ready to look at developing additional storage in this area or additional water sources. So we think that the results of what we've done so far will be taken into account. There'll probably be additional analyses to support those. But for now, the question was simply, what can the town and what can the farmers do to alleviate some seasonal shortages? So the specific objective of this case study, model the Rio Grande subbasin and identify adaptation measures that can help meet future urban water demand for San Salvador, as well as irrigation water demand south of the city. What I'm going to describe is a standard, set of steps. We wanted to estimate water demand, both for urban use and irrigation use. We used the hydrobid model to estimate water flows, and then we use those two results in order to characterize unmet water demand. What are the shortages? And then we looked at a couple of adaptation options for reducing unmet demand to determine which one is effective, which ones are effective, and to what extent. And then we looked at the cost of those measures to characterize cost effectiveness. Let me start by just describing the water distribution network, because it's obviously you've got to know where water's flowing and how things are connected before you can do this kind of analysis. The Rio Grande flows into the Los Molinos dike, which I showed you in the picture. Water is taken off of that and conveyed to San Salvador, and there's some return flows to the main stem of the Rio Grande below San Salvador. Water is also taken off the dike to supply two other reservoirs, the main one of which is La Maderas. And after La Maderas, there is a small hydropower plant and a series of irrigation offtakes to support sugar, cane, and tobacco. There's also some water use for processing the sugar and the tobacco. That's the industrial use that you'll see. There are also some small towns, Palpala, El Carmen, which take water off of smaller dams, and there's some smaller rivers, Alisos and Perico. You'll see some figures later on for estimated flows for Los Alisos and Perico. This is where they come in. But for purposes of the analysis, we really we assumed that all of the storage was in one dam. We didn't look at flows in between these, and we were really just looking at irrigation demand overall, not by field or by system. And so for purposes of the analysis, we looked at San Salvador, the other towns, irrigation as the main uses. I won't go through this in a lot of detail. Suffice it to say that we looked at the current population in San Salvador and the other series. We assumed a certain amount of population growth at rate, and then did our best to estimate current usage and per capita per day demand. And for irrigation water, there was not really a good, reliable estimate of what was currently being used. We looked at crop area and what the water requirements for those crops are, and estimated based on some assumptions about the current efficiency of use to back calculate what the current water demand is. And then, so not surprisingly, standard result that you find in many different locations. The irrigation demand is considerably greater than consumption by urban uses, so about 5 times under current circumstances. And then we also looked at modeling future climate as a way of trying to determine what future water demand would be. And also, these were the climate scenarios that we used for estimating future water availability and flows as well. We actually looked at 2 different ways of getting climate information, one from Climate Wizard, and then also downscaling several different climate models. We contracted with CIMA, which is a meteorological institute in Argentina, which has developed its own ensemble of climate forecasts, models for the region, and so we use theirs as well. We didn't find that many significant differences among the different climate models, and so I won't be describing in detail how the results from one model differed from another. The results were relatively consistent across the various climate projections. We looked 50 years out, and actually urban water demand increases more rapidly than the irrigation water demand, in part because our understanding from the information we could gather is that the irrigable area is already fully developed and fully cropped. And so the main driving force for increasing irrigation water demand is really the increases in temperature and the increase in evapotranspiration. So making some reasonable assumptions about population growth and a bit of increase in other uses in urban areas. It looks like 50 years out, irrigation demand will still be 3 times what urban demand is, and both of them will be considerably higher than they are now. So that's the first step, looking at irrigation demand. Second step is how much water is available. And this is where I get back to the question that you were asking. The Rio Grande Basin is outlined in yellow here. And the part that is a bit browner or pinker is the Rio San Francisco, which is the larger basin with which the Rio Grande sits. When we looked at, and Jujuy, our area of interest, is up here. When we looked at the availability of stream flow data from stream gauges, there was a very mixed bag. There was some data in the upper parts of the watershed. There was more data in the lower parts of the watershed. They were for different time periods. They were for, some of them were interrupted, some of them were continuous. We're just showing 2 results here. The outflow point, or closest we could get to the outflow point for the Rio Grande itself, the monitoring stopped in 1981. There was a much more complete record available at close to the outflow point for the entire San Francisco Basin. That's at Caimanchito, and that was for a 50-year period. And so we chose to use the Caimanchito data as the basis for calibration. And we were able to do that because we could apply the model, either to the particular subbasin or to the larger basin by expanding the scale, which is one of the real positive features of this system. So we chose to use Caimanchito. We did the calibration based on the San Francisco Basin at Caimanchito, and then we simulated. After we did the calibration, we had the model running accurately. We did the simulation for the Rio Grande, Perico, and the Los Alisos, as I said earlier. These are just displays of the calibration results showing a very close match to the historical record at Caimanchito. And then we were, once the model was parameterized and calibrated, we were able to then predict flows at Rio Grande in a way that was fairly close to the historical record that was available through 1980. We felt like that was an adequate match to give us reliable results. We then took the climate scenarios that I described, 4 different climate scenarios, and produced daily flows that were then summarized to monthly and annual flows at the Los Molinos as well as the other points. And those were the results. Again, not very much difference. The projections based on using the different climate models. Any questions so far? Okay, so this is the next step. What is, once we know how much water is needed and we know how much water is going to be available, then what is the unmet demand? The unmet urban demand, of course, increases, but it's still relatively small compared to unmet demand for irrigation uses. And so this gets pretty dramatic over time, and it's because of increased temperature and increased evapotranspiration. So in the absence of any adaptive measures, what's going to happen is that there are going to be much more frequent water shortages and crop failures from lack of sufficient water. We can look at this a little more closely. There are a lot of different ways of displaying the data. You can narrow in and looking at seasonality effects. So the shortages, even though in the previous slide they were looking at annual basis, really the shortages happen on a seasonal basis, starting in September, with the greatest shortages coming in October and November. That's for irrigation. This is the same picture for urban. Of course, the scales are much different. And also for the other towns. Again, shortages increasing over time, but on a much smaller scale than for San Salvador. So the adaptation options that we looked at were, of course, a base case where there are really no changes. Irrigation efficiency remains at 37%, and leakage in the urban water supply system remains at our assumed rate of 30%. Option 1 is to improve urban water efficiency by investing in water meters and reducing leakage and doing a better job of billing and being able to overall reduce the amount of wastage in the system. The second option was looking at improving irrigation efficiency, and this was a modest increase using targeted drip irrigation for crops without any improvements in the conveyance of water in the canals or to the fields. And so this would really be sort of step 1 in improving efficiency for irrigation systems. So it was shifting from basic furrow irrigation to a surface drip system. And then we looked at what the combined effects of those two would be. Remember, I'm going to back up for a second. So I don't think I emphasized this enough at the time. Remember that these systems are really disconnected. So water is taken off in 2 different directions, one to San Salvador and one to the irrigation, the dams and storage for irrigation. So in this particular network, really improving efficiency in urban use doesn't gain you any additional water that can be used in the irrigation system because there's no connectivity to it. The outflows and return flows are below the offtake for the irrigation systems. Similarly, saving irrigation water, improving irrigation efficiency really doesn't give you any more water for San Salvador because storage, they have no storage capacity. This dam is not storing any water, and they're just taking water off and run a river. So there are other options that could be introduced here so that you could get some feedback between the 2 systems. But for now, really we're looking at alleviating urban water shortages by improving efficiency there and alleviating the agricultural water shortages by improving efficiency. No, well, it depends on how the network is designed, and how it was built and what its objectives were at that time. The question was, is this arrangement typical? I'd have to turn to the one engineer I know who's in the room to ask her that question.
Somewhat typical in that part of the world, just because, I mean, I get the sense that the crop areas
Right.
and cities were older separately. So I would think, and also probably the initial urban system was smaller, expanded over time. See, it's just so I would think.
I think the design of multiple use systems is a more recent phenomenon. I'll just give you that to hold. And so this is probably not an unusual circumstance. Oops, sorry, wrong button. Okay, so we'll get back to where we were. So we're looking at these adaptation options. So for the urban system for San Salvador, basically improving efficiency, reducing losses from 30% to 10%, does alleviate some of the season demand and measured either by month or on an annual basis over a longer period of time. So there is some improvement. You can see the change in scales here. Unfortunately, when they put this figure together, they didn't keep the scales the same. So you'll see that the top measurement here is 12 million cubic meters, and this is 6. So this is really half of the original value. Looking at irrigation, there's a really much more dramatic improvement, in part because there's so much more water being used in irrigation that the improved efficiency really helps a lot more. But there's a very dramatic improvement and reduction in unmet demand. This is actually, even though you may see 50 and what looks like 45, this is 4.5 here. So there's a tenfold change in the scale from the losses or unmet demand on the two options. There is a bit of additional improvement by doing both, but again, there's no real, in some ways, this is not meaningful because there's no interplay between the two systems. You can add up the improvements by doing both, and there is less unmet demand, but it's not because there's water that's being transferred between the two systems. The next step is to look at the effectiveness and cost effectiveness of these options. It helps, I've grayed out the results in this table for each of the climate scenarios. I've grayed out 3 of them so you can just focus on one. It makes the point a little better. You can see that the real improvement, dramatic improvement, comes from improving irrigation efficiency. There is some improvement for the urban systems as well, and by doing both, obviously, is better overall. The cost of the capital investments and maintenance for improving the urban system were calculated to come up with a cost per cubic meter saved or unmet demand alleviated. Really, this was looking at the 2 different interventions, this was the more cost-effective to reduce unmet demand in the urban areas. The cost-effectiveness of the irrigation systems really differed depending on whether you were working in tobacco or sugar, but in both cases they were about 4 cents to 8 cents per cubic meter saved, or cubic meter of unmet demand alleviated. I'll stop there again for any questions.
Yeah, what was the assumptions as you are looking at scenarios down the future up to 2060, I guess I saw. What was your land use pattern? You know, because as you know, land use in that period of time could affect the hydrologic cycle even more than climate change, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely.
So, do you guys consider that? Or?
We considered it, but we were not able to really look at it very carefully. The assumptions that we were given and the dialogue that we had with officials in the area, they really wanted to look at, there was some increase in impermeable area in the urban zones, but that's not really where the water's coming from. The water's coming from upstream, and the area was already fully cropped and fully irrigated. And so we really couldn't play very much with changes in cropping, increases in the irrigated area, or decreases in the irrigated area. And so for purposes of just demonstrating the modeling system, we didn't work with that. But I agree with you very much.
I believe especially on the deforestation.
Right.
And those are large features.
Well, most of it's deforested already. Maybe it'll improve. Others?
I think you covered it, but I might have lost track. So as water's coming into the system, so you started out with the water supply and then the water demand. But how is it captured water that passes through the system and doesn't stay in the system and goes to another area? And then conversely, the opportunity for catching and storing that.
We didn't look specifically at increased storage, but that would be the most logical thing for San Salvador to do. But again, if they were to store it and then use it, there would be return flows to the Rio Grande. And our focus really was on these two uses in the area, and not on how much water was left and returned for downstream use. So that would certainly be possible within the system if the scope of the analysis were larger. But the question that we were asked was, can they alleviate shortages in these two uses? Okay, so just to wrap up and then give a brief preview of what comes next. The purpose of this case study really was to just illustrate use of the system and to generate some results that we could show to folks in IDB and some of their member states. So the Hydrobid model was working, and it was capable of doing the modeling that we set out for it. Over the period of interest of 50 years, really the impact of climate change on flows was small, regardless of which climate model we used. But there were quite a bit of increase in demand, both from population growth in the urban system, as well as increased evapotranspiration in the agricultural system. The conclusion really was, for this basin, improving irrigation efficiency is really the most critical intervention of those that we considered and looked at. And so in phase 2 of this work, which will continue with the IDB, they have explicitly asked us to couple the surface water model with a groundwater model, so that we're able to look at availability of water and allocation of water from both surface and groundwater systems. We'll do a lot more work on economic modeling to tie this in with the kinds of economic assessments that have to be performed in order to justify infrastructure projects. And we expect that they'll have some applications in which we look explicitly at changes in crop yields or changes in hydropower capacity because of changes in water availability. There will probably be at least 4, perhaps 6 IDB projects that will be evaluated using the system over the next couple of years. And there will also be, we'll be providing some technical assistance, but there's actually going to be a separate effort to develop a community of practice through some of the regional institutions that IDB is working with to build up a group of users for the system. So thanks very much for your attention. I'm glad to answer other questions. Our clients for this work, Fernando Miralles and Raul Munoz, their contact information is there. I'm Gene Brantly. My contact information is there, as well as 2 of my colleagues, Fekadu, Moreda, and Alan. Any other discussion or pointing out some things that we need to do that we haven't done?
Yeah, I think this is a very good effort in terms of putting together these databases that are really lacking in Latin America, and for many countries. It's very difficult, it's very expensive to do an analysis like that, because then you have to hire a contractor and do all this work pretty much at a price, and sometimes there's not even time. So this is it's a good effort to make available. You know, we're used in the United States to have this handy, you know, in the web. So this is a great effort. But one thing that I was thinking that it would be important here is because this is about decision making into the future. You know, what options I'm going to have is to add some module or look at uncertainty and how you make decisions under uncertainty, because not only the land use issues that I just point out, but even the climate models today, the new AR5 models, there are like 60 models and all sorts of things. And also there is a lot of uncertainty on many things when you project. So having a way of looking into modeling with uncertainty will be an important thing.
Thanks. It's a very good point. One of the things that I've become aware of recently is some work that's going on at University of Massachusetts for the World Bank, actually, where instead of modeling, if you will, modeling looking forward using a variety of climate models, all of which give you basically the same result and don't really elucidate any facts that would cause you to make a different decision. What they're doing is trying to turn that around a bit. Casey Brown at Massachusetts is doing this work. And what they're looking at is how, if you can define a performance range that your structure or infrastructure needs to operate within, what is the likelihood under any given climate scenario that you would generate conditions that would actually fall outside of that performance, that would cause the project to perform outside of that range. And it requires pretty high-powered computing and a lot of iterations, but I think it will result in a clearer set of results from the standpoint that you're really looking at risk as opposed to trying to come up with a range of point estimates of various flows.
I have a question first, and then we have a question from the online audience as well. So the question I have is that you mentioned, going back to the beginning when you were talking about the model, you said that the 4 factors that you looked at to determine how much water is going into the stream were precipitation and land use and temperature and soil content, right? But does
the climate models, just to be clear, the climate models are giving you temperature and rainfall.
But the inputs that you put into the
other inputs are soil type, which doesn't really change, land use, which does change.
But then what about, does the slope have any impact though?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So how do you?
That's why we developed this analytical hydrography data set, because it gives you the topography and gives you the slope at any point in each of those catchments.
Okay.
It gives you a slope function.
I see.
which is what is used to drive runoff, the estimate of runoff into the stream.
Okay, great. And then we have a question from the online audience. Sujoy Roy is asking, in the calibration slide, the simulated flows are consistently higher than observed for all peak flows. How does this affect the water volume estimates and therefore the estimation of water shortage?
I would probably have to defer to Fekadu Moreda on the team to give a more sophisticated answer, but the answer he's given me to that question is that what we're really interested, the peak flows, yes, are consistently higher than what the model's predicting, but the peak flows are not really generating the majority of the flow in the stream, and so the calibration is sufficient for our modeling purposes because it is capturing most of the volume of flow, even though we're not getting the peaks. If we were worried about storm drainage or flood control, then we might want to adjust the calibration so we're capturing more of the peak flows. But for the purposes that we were looking at, that wasn't necessary.
I'm not sure if I understood. You said that the impact of climate change was small, and yet a lot of the water shortage was caused by evaporation.
No, I'm sorry. Maybe I misspoke.
Maybe I misunderstood.
What was small is the difference in results that we obtained by looking at 4 different climate models. The impact of climate was we didn't observe a dramatic impact of climate on stream flows. Okay? The impact of climate comes in increasing water demand, because as temperature goes up, the amount of water that a crop requires goes up because it's transpiring more water. And so even though there were not dramatic changes in rainfall that were affecting water availability, the effect of climate was on increasing water demand. And therefore, we saw a great increase in unmet demand, okay? Because availability is staying the same, but demand is going up. And there really were not significant differences in between the different climate models that we observed. Does that make?
Gene, you mentioned at the outset that the client, the bank, did this for the client countries in the region, and the case study that you showed was very much. It seemed like it was for a watershed manager or an urban water manager, and I'm wondering.
It was actually for a basin management authority.
Basin management. Right. Yeah. So what if you were a national policymaker and you were trying to design an adaptation policy for the country, or you were a development agency focused on that particular country? Does the tool have applicability for at the national level as well as the basin or watershed level?
Well, I think its applicability at a national level is derivative from its application at a basin level. Essentially, what we're doing some work in Peru right now, and we may be doing work soon elsewhere, where the first job is to model all of the basins, or to model a large set of basins, and they want the modeling platform and the data availability in order to efficiently develop models for many of the basins. And then they will begin going through a process of trying to determine how much water is available in those basins and how you would allocate it, and look basin by basin at what some of the challenges are, where the unmet demand is, and what adaptations would be appropriate. And then deriving from that, you could come up with some guidelines for an overall adaptation policy. But this is really a modeling tool that starts at the basin level. It's very, very much tied to the hydrography, to the topography, the stream network, and the catchments.
If you wanted to aggregate it for the whole country, then the tool doesn't have the ability to,
well, no, it
to
does.
do that.
It does. Now, if you want to look at an entire country, that's fine. But you would do it by first modeling the major basins.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the phase 2 integrating this into the project prep at IDB.
Well, we're going to pursue that in sort of two different parts. Okay, time's up. Right. We're going to be doing some work to just improve the software and add additional modules. So the integration of surface water and groundwater. Trying to make sure that the output is generated from this system in a way that is amenable to further analysis with WEAP or with some of the economic models. Looking at connecting the flow estimates to reservoir management software. So we're going to try to bring in other pieces that would allow to make this a more complete modeling system. And then our clients, Fernando, Raul, are basically trying to identify specific projects within IDB that are under development right now, where the analytical tools would be useful. And in most cases, those projects, the analyses to support that project preparation are being done by national institutions. And so those institutions would be provided with copies of the software and the data sets. We would provide some technical assistance in helping them learn how to use it, and then they would be doing the application. Does that make sense? And right now, we don't, the topics that I described are what we expect to see in some of those projects, but we haven't learned yet.
You mentioned that this is being rolled out over the next 6 months or a year. But I think you said that some of the source information could be gotten now. No. No. We have to wait for the rollout.
It's IDB's product. I mean, we created it, but they own it. So if you're a personal friend of Fernando's, you might get it. But
I could become his personal friend.
No, he's actually under some pressure from within IDB to roll this out in a systematic and organized way. And I don't know the timetable because for reasons of competitive procurement, they've separated the various parts. So we're going to continue providing a lot of the software design and the technical assistance, but we're not going to be handling the rollout and the community practice.
Thank you. Do you think this model would be possible to roll it out in Africa or Asia, or do you think the kind of availability of local data?
Oh no, it would certainly could be applied in other regions. We didn't rely on local data. You know, we developed the stream network and the topography using satellite imagery, from the shuttle imagery, really, digital elevation model, DEM, and that same information is available. We're using international data sets for soil type and temperature and rainfall, et cetera. Now, they may not be as accurate as well-designed in situ monitoring network, but there are many parts of Latin America where that doesn't exist either. So we've had some conversations with organizations that we think might be interested in funding that kind of work, but so far it's going forward in Latin America. Any other questions? Go ahead.
USAID has been working with the glacier lakes and such, especially in Peru and Nepal. Are these two projects in any way related?
They may become related.
Okay.
They haven't been yet. But we've done some work in the Chura Basin in Peru. And I think that there's some interest in connecting the work that we've done with what others have done. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming.